minor league baseball season is over, but we're back with another episode of Minor League News and Brews. And by we, I mean me, Craig Toth, co-host of the Bucs in the Basement podcast with my good friend Chris Lanuti, and the host of Minor League News and Brews, talking about everything and anything that goes on down in the Pirates minor league system. And I thought the best way to take a look back at what happened the whole way from the Florida Complex League, the whole way up to the Indianapolis Indians, was to kind of break down the best hitter and best pitcher at each level, the top Pirates prospect performers, if you will. A lot of these names are going to be fairly familiar to Pirates fans, even the ones that pay attention to the minor leagues a little bit on the periphery. But I think that especially in the beginning here, these are names that if you've watched any games or read or listened to any of these previous episodes, they may be familiar to you as well. We're going to start down in the Florida Complex League. Possibly one of my favorite prospects from this past year, Esmeralda Valdez. He's an outfielder, but also plays a little bit of first base. He's in his 19-year-old season, and he is a returning player to the Florida Complex League, played in it last year, didn't have the greatest numbers, but this year he slashed 312, 377, 518 with 6 home runs. The K rate was around 22.6%. Base on balls getting up towards what I kind of see as like that little bit of a threshold. I put that at usually like 10%. He was at 9.4%. Had a very solid season. I know that like guys like, Yordani De Los Santos, Lonnie White Jr. may have been some of the fresher names within that. But for anybody that saw Esmeralda play, he just, really good bat-to-ball skills, a lot of power, good size. And going over to the mound, Michael Kennedy, and this one will be kind of like really no surprise. I noticed that as I was writing down these names, and as for anybody that knows me, I do actually still write this stuff down, is that a lot of the players were ones that were drafted during the 2022 draft. Starting off with the fourth rounder, Michael Kennedy, signed for a cool $1 million, almost double the slot. The slot was $554,800. He got about 42 innings pitched in there, down in the lower levels of the minors especially, and then even as we go up, the whip, the walks and hits per innings pitched, is something that really pay attention to, because if you're not putting guys on base, then less likely to give up runs. There's not too many times where a guy has a very solid whip and then you'll see the ERAs up really high. It kind of is maybe showing that there may be a little bit of a course correction at some point in time. Michael Kennedy's whip for that time was a 1.039, a 2.13 ERA. The only downside to him that I've kind of seen is just the velocity. He is a young pitcher. He's an 18-year-old season. So maybe, over the off season, bulking up a little bit, just becoming, maybe working on some things mechanically to add some velocity to this. He did have a solid strikeout rate, 11.69 Ks per 9. But did walk a decent amount of guys at a 4.04 clip based on balls per 9. Not something you really want to see. It was really like either strikeout, walk, didn't give up too many hits, because when you see the base on balls per 9 get that high, you may see the whip get a little bit higher. But, did have a very solid season. Moving up to Bradenton, sticking with the 2022 draft, in the first round. 200,000 over slot, 7.2 million, first rounder, Tamar Johnson. And I know for the old school baseball fans, people would be looking at that batting average. And I would like to see that batting average, be a little bit higher, especially for a guy that was talked about as being, having some of the best bat to ball skills, and getting comparisons to potential and, former Hall of Famers as far as that goes. In his time during Bradenton, the first thing, everybody's talking about this, is his walk rate. And it did continue when he did receive that promotion up to high A Greensboro. 21.8% base on ball rate, which is, just showing that he's not going to be one of those guys that's really, chasing too much. The pitching down in the Florida State League, in the Florida Complex League, obviously is not going to be to the caliber when you reach, high A and especially double A. So showing some of that patience to the plate, but may have, gotten a little bit frustrated at times. Did see the 26.7% K rate. And then there's that batting average that I talked about, 244. But he did have the on-base percentage of 420, slugging of 448, 16 home runs. So we did see, some of that power potential from his smaller frame that was talked about, from a shortstop, second baseman. You'll take those power numbers all day. Would like to see the batting average come up a little bit. But for his, first season in professional ball, first full season, starting off with, a hamstring injury and getting off to, a little bit of a slow start, and being able to turn it on, a lot of good stuff there. On the pitching side of it, a guy that really impressed me, Derek Diamond, sixth rounder from Ole Miss, also from the 2022 draft. Pitched 74.2 innings for the Marauders this past season, going straight towards the whip. The whip was the 1.232, ERA 398. Base on balls per nine was really good for him this year. It was a 1.18 base on balls per nine. The K's, a little bit disappointing. Want to see even a pitcher who's not really seen as a strikeout pitcher. You want to be averaging at least, a strikeout per inning. Get that 9, Ks per 9. He was a little bit short of that, 7.59 Ks per 9. But Derek Diamond put in, a really good season this year. Looking forward to see what he can do for Greensboro next year, maybe hopefully Altoona at some point in time, but just one of those guys that, just had a very solid season. Moving up to high A Greensboro, and this is a name, I know there was probably, people that were saying, maybe like a Jace Bowen, and I do love Jace Bowen, but a guy that just kind of impressed me, the entire season, was Trace Gonzalez, and another guy from the 2022 draft. But this guy that he's not a power hitter, and I don't know if he's ever going to be a power hitter. Good outfielder, can play all the positions in the outfield, but for him, it's a lot of it is just the on base, getting on base, and not striking out a ton. And looking at a guy who has an 18.7% K rate and a 14.5% base on ball rate, hits for a decent average, the 287, 401, and then you're going to see the 402 for the slugging, which, he hit 8 home runs, but as we all know, this is Greensboro, so even guys that, don't have a ton of power, you're going to see more of those balls leave the yard than you would, in especially, in Altoona, Indianapolis, and as you're moving up to the major leagues. So the 8 home runs kind of turns into 3 to 4 to 5 maybe once you get up to the upper level. So not a guy with a bunch of power, good defensive, good, base on balls, good bat to ball skills, and kind of a guy that, you may put in the future as a possible prototypical, leadoff hitter. I know that's kind of old school. We see, teams putting some of the guys that have, high K rates, decent, base on balls, but hit a lot of home runs and stuff like that. We see them as the leadoff hitters now. But if we're going back to the old school, Trace Gonzalez would definitely fall into that. And on the pitching side, hitting the bump here, I'm gonna have to go with Bubba Chandler, and the overall numbers don't look great. 106 innings pitched, and like I said, we go towards that whip, and people will think I'm kind of crazy here. Overall, he had the 1.500 whip, which obviously is not great. I mean, for a starter, even a back end starter, I know a lot of people give numbers, the 1 through 5s or whatever, but I usually go front end, middle, back. Even with that, you need to have that, definitely below 1.4, creeping towards 1.3. So the 1.500 is not great. 4.75 ERA overall. Had the 4.33 base on balls per nine, which is probably some of the reason for that higher whip. Did have 10.19 Ks per nine. But the big thing and the reason for me kind of choosing him as, the top Pirates pitcher in Greensboro this past year would be his last 49 innings pitched. I think that was around 9 starts. A 1.04 whip, a 2.57 ERA, got the base on balls per nine down from 4.33 to 2.94. Did see the K slip a little bit to exactly 9, but I mean, we saw better command, better control. And this is a kid who is, this was his first season of just being a pitcher. I mean, when he was in high school, he was a hitter, a pitcher, a quarterback. Last season in Bradenton, he was a pitcher and a hitter and still doing, some fielding on the side. But this was the first time where he focused solely on pitching. And I believe at the beginning of the season, I even talked about how I could possibly see him starting out in Bradenton. So to see him struggle a little bit at the beginning of the season in Greensboro, not really something that concerns me. Did get the late season cup of coffee call up to Altoona, much deserved. But Bubba Chandler, definitely the pitcher for me in Greensboro. Moving up to Altoona, and this one to me was, I don't know if it's a little bit concerning. I know a lot of people would say on the hitting side, you could go with a Matt Gorski, and I thought Gorski had a solid season, but after the season he had with Greensboro last year, call up to Altoona before he gets the big hamstring injury that pretty much ends his season. Did come back a little bit, but didn't really do much. Didn't go to the Arizona Fall League like they wanted him to. So I couldn't really go with him. And I didn't see, a lot of, really, really strong performances. So I don't know if people would see this as a cop-out or what it would be. But, I mean, Joe Perez. And a lot of people didn't notice that, when Houston decided to move on from him, wasn't having a great season in AAA for them. I believe his WRC plus was around 75. Didn't see him as part of the future down in Houston, even though 2017 second round player out of high school, still, fairly young, right around 24 years old. In his time in Altoona, slashing 341, 477, 624, 7 home runs. And I know that people would say, that maybe he was playing down a level, but still fairly not old for the level. So for me, he's the player of the year for me. And then the pitcher, like I said, we're going to start seeing names that everybody is extremely familiar with, and this is Anthony Solomito. He had 51.2 innings pitched, got off extremely hot start, cooled off a little bit. Talked about him in previous episodes, and was put on the developmental list. Came back, put on the developmental list to end the season. But we also talked about how many innings he pitched this season. I got a 4.35 ERA, a 1.219 WHIP, so still a good end to the season. Surprisingly, based on how the numbers were at the beginning of the year, as far as strikeouts, especially Greensboro, then in Altoona, only 20 years old, ended with 8.71 Ks per nine, 2.44 base on balls per nine. Just a lot of good stuff to see from this kid at such a young age. Didn't really know, what we were going to see from him. Could have, possibly seen him spend the entire year down in Altoona. So, down in Greensboro, but to see him play in Altoona as much as he did, over 50 innings, be a good start to the year, a good start to the season, and hopefully, kind of builds upon, what he learned. And you're seeing players fast-tracked, especially within the Pirate system, a little bit more. One of the next guys we're going to be talking about in Indianapolis, absolutely fast-tracked, based on what we've seen previously, and we can kind of even just go to that with Indianapolis with the pitching side of things. Jared Jones didn't have the end to the season that a lot of people, were kind of hoping to see the call up. Everybody at this point in time, knows, if they didn't do it, why they weren't going to do it. And that's because he doesn't have to be added to the 40-man to be protected from the Rule 5 draft this year. And I know that there's still a decent amount of fat on the major league team that could be trimmed off in those 40-man spots. But Ben Cherington has shown that he is, very cautious, and just with those, making those types of decisions and adding somebody when they actually technically don't need to be added. But also, wearing down towards the end of the season, had a couple good starts. But then had, a little bit of a disappointing, outing in his last start for the minor league season. But overall, for his age at Indianapolis, and this isn't including the Altoona numbers, this is just the Indianapolis numbers, 82 innings pitched, a 1.317 WHIP. So at that point, looking at, back of the end of the rotation type of numbers, but for his age, 22-year-old season in Indianapolis, can't be, too disappointed in that. A 4.72 ERA, a little bit high on the walks, 3.73 base on balls per nine, but did have the 10.87 Ks per nine. And, his stuff, the secondary stuff that we saw from him, I still think it's possible that his slider is his best pitch. The fastball is, kind of lights out, and I know people, walking towards that. Is he a starter? Is he going to be a reliever? A lot of that, two pitch, type of stuff. And it was the talk with Rowanzi, the talk with Luis Ortiz. Can you just be a fastball, slider type of guy, curveball? He does have technically three pitches, has mixed the change in there a little bit. There's some, going with mixed, there's mixed reviews on that. I saw it work well at times. I saw it not work so great at times. But I think that people, I don't know, may overestimate, it's like, oh, he's only that two-pitch pitcher. Well, I forget who it was at one point in time had him on the Bucs in the Basement show. I think it might have been Jeff Karstens, was like, but what if your two pitches are just absolutely lights out? And for Jared Jones, I kind of see it along, those lines. If he ends up being in the bullpen, is that a failure? Is that a loss? I don't know. Depends on, how successful he is in that. But for me, I don't want to see it mess with too much. If those things are working well and it's working well for him, we're definitely going to see him at some point in time in 2024 had a very good season. Unexpected to be called up as early as he was to Indianapolis. So very happy with the type of season he had. And then on the hitting side of things, it's going to be Nicky G for me, Nick Gonzalez. And I know, Miguel Andujar, a lot of people will say, but I don't really consider him like a prospect anymore. I mean, he's had so much time in AAA, and once again, knowing that it's not the best end to the season, for a Nick Gonzalez, getting the call up back up to the major leagues after the Indianapolis season ended, uh, getting sent down to Indianapolis to work on some things, but we did see a decent amount of improvement from him. I talked about this. I don't know if it was on the Bucs in the Basement or one of the more recent episode of Minor League News and Brews, talking about Ben Cherington saying that it was kind of the expectation for Nick Gonzalez to spend an entire season in AAA. I know that people wanted to see him called back up a little bit sooner. I don't know. For me, I was thinking that maybe just let his season end well in AAA. End kind of on a high note, on a positive. I'm gonna see him get into maybe, I don't know when you're listening to this, but possibly a couple more at bats at the major leagues. But the way he ended his minor league season, cutting down on the Ks, base on balls going up, to see his numbers sit where they do at the end of the season in AAA, it's encouraging to me. I mean, the K rate started out at the beginning of the season well north of 30, which is not something you want to see. But ended the season 26.6, K percentage, which for him, I mean, that's about one of the best you can ask for, especially when you see the base on balls percentage go up over 10. He ends the year at 12%, hitting 281, 379, 507, 14 home runs. For Nicky G, just a definitely, a solid season. Couldn't ask for, like I said, much more to end the season, especially kind of the way the season began, just with the high K rates and seeing him make adjustments to balls, especially some of the off-speed stuff. Give him a fastball down the middle and he'll launch it. But I definitely saw him, make the adjustments and stuff that he needed to do, and that could be done at AAA because. I mean, a lot of the times, AAA is where it's like finishing school. It's where you get your polishing in, and you can really kind of work on some of that stuff. Now, will that turn out to be success at the major leagues? I mean, who knows? And he's going to have some tough competition at second base. From what Chris and I talked about this last time, we think, Jared Triolo. I know a lot of people are pushing towards first base. For me, for Chris, we're pushing more for him to be, maybe starting second baseman, but also, moving around the field because he does have that flexibility for off days for whoever the regular first baseman would be, third base for Brian Hayes. So he's a guy that would be starting, every day, but wouldn't be playing, the entire time at second base. But then you've got, Nick Gonzalez, Liover Peguero. There's G1 Bay. I mean, there's definitely a lot of competition there. So, I mean, next year is going to be, fairly telling, for what type of player, Nick Gonzalez is going to turn out to be. And this was a very exciting minor league season. I decided to do Minor League News and Brews. I've been talking about it for a long time. So anybody that's listened, during the regular season, greatly appreciate it. Hopefully going to be having some more content, some stuff coming, maybe like a level by level recap coming up in, the coming weeks, just like we did. The previews level by level prior to the season. Definitely going to be talking some Rule 5 stuff. A lot of stuff that can still go on, even though, the minor league season has ended. We've still got the Arizona Fall League coming up, so going to be, talking about some of those players. But to everybody that's listened, really appreciate it. And we're going to get to some beer reviews.
A pitcher of beer, a pitcher of beer. Let's order another pitcher of beer. That pitcher of beer should come over here. I love that pitcher of beer.
When I was trying to think about, a beer review to do here, and as I sit here, the Cincinnati Reds are 1.5, 1.5 games out of the wild card. And for me, some people hate the Cubs, some people hate the Cardinals. I have no idea why, but for just the Reds, to me, they just frustrate me and annoy me more than any other team in the Central. I don't know if it's the Great American Small Park. I don't know if it's them thinking that, I love that they make opening day into, a celebration, but it just, I don't know, Cincinnati. So in celebration of, hopefully, fingers crossed, the Cincinnati Reds not making the playoffs, sorry, Cincinnati fans, I am going to go with Rhinegas Brewing. Cincy made, have had a decent amount of their beers before, starting off with the Imperial India Pale Ale Knowledge, 8.5%. I had this one first in this sample pack just because I wanted to have the beers that I might like a little bit better towards the end. As I've talked about before, as I've gotten a little bit older, been drinking craft beers for probably going on, about 12 years now. I started to get into the craft beer scene just because, I'm not going to lie, I was a PBR Icy Light drinker in my 20s and early 30s and stuff, and would go over to my buddy's house, and he would have Dogfish Head, and he was, really big into some of the IPAs, different stuff like that. And if I was going to have a couple beers, it was going to be drinking what he had. So I definitely did like those a little bit more, the higher alcohol content, the stronger beers. One of those, in this one, 8.5%. But I had this one in the beginning. I'll give it a 375, bring it down to 325. Of the Imperial IPAs that I've had before, it was solid, but it's definitely not at the top of that. This one was a new one for me. It is Kiwi the Bird, a New Zealand style IPA, coming in at 7%. Definitely liked it better than the Imperial. Didn't know what to expect from it, but a solid beer. Give this one a 400. Bring that down to 350. Then we have Vision, the West Coast style pale ale, 5.5%. A good West Coast style pale ale. This one also around a 400, bring it down to 350. And then everybody knows how much I love the hazies. This one is called Juicy Truth, a hazy, juicy IPA, coming in a little bit higher than the juicies. I usually kind of level out at around 6%. This one came in at about 6.5%. Definitely was my favorite beer of this sampler pack. And this is, I'm going to give it a 425, bring it down to 375. Going to be the last beer review for the quote-unquote regular minor league season. Hoping to get out to some more breweries around the area here, during the off season. But for the last time here, and can't wait till minor league baseball season comes back. As always here on Minor League News and Brews, it's go Indians, go Curve, go Hoppers, go Marauders, go FCL. DSL, and also the Arizona Fall League. Can't wait to dig into some of that as the off season starts.